Welcome into Courtside Seats with Kroeger, a Charlotte Hornets podcast. Here he is, Chris Kroeger.
Episode 11 of Courtside Seats, and every week I feel like we roll on this podcast, and we spend a bulk of the first few months of the podcast talking to people inside our building, and then we started talking to Bobby Marks, and then Haberstroh comes on last week, and so this is us pushing it out in a different direction, and I'm really excited to talk to this guy because I'm just going to call him the Woj of the shoe world. Nick DePaula is with us on Courtside Seats. Nick, what's up, man? How you doing?
I like that nickname a lot. I have a couple of friends that have called me Sneaker Woj in the past, and obviously Woj is incredible at what he does, so anything related to that, I'm on board.
No, I think it's high praise, and I think it's justified. And so Nick DePaula of ESPN now, your creative director at Nice Kicks, and
Yep.
Man, you've carved out this niche for yourself in a way that, I think there are a lot of people talking about shoes, or a lot of people blogging, reviewing shoes, but, you do all this stuff. You're an influencer. You're also a guy that gets the branding aspect of it. You've got connections to where you're breaking shoe news, so you got the player tie-in too. So, I think, there are other guys trying to do what you do, but you've really blazed this path over the last few years of owning the shoe space, and it keeps growing.
No, I appreciate it. I think it started out for me. I've lived in Portland, Oregon for now about 11 years. And, it was always something where I think everybody that plays basketball has that moment where they realize they're not going to make the league themselves. And for me, that was in middle school. And then from there, it just becomes a matter of how can you merge your love of sports and shoes and just the whole athletic industry and turn a career into that. So that was always the game plan early on. And I helped to run Soul Collector magazine for about 7 years, and that's really where a lot of my connections and ties with all the brands really started. And then from there, about 3 years ago, Woj brought me on at the Vertical when he was launching that with Yahoo Sports, and that's when really just the platform of that Woj had took everything to a different level. So it's been pretty awesome.
Look, I'm with you, man, because I love sports. I played sports growing up. I wasn't that good, and so now I talk about them for a living. So I'm living the dream myself. I am with you 100%. And so I guess let me guess the number one question you get asked. Okay, you ready for this? Do you buy your own shoes? Is that the number one question you get asked, or is it something different?
It's a variation of that. Usually it's what's your favorite shoe, which is the Zoom Flight 95, which was Jason Kidd's shoe back in the day.
Okay.
And then also, how many pairs of shoes do you have, which I try not to answer that question because it's gotten out of control. But, I still buy shoes all the time. I'm still checking every single day to see what's popping up and what's coming out. And I definitely am lucky enough to get a few pairs here and there from all the brands as well. So it's gotten quite ridiculous. I've got quite a few pairs.
There's so much we can talk about with this, and I want to because now I've become a sneakerhead since I've joined the team, which is crazy. And so but just what you just talked about, like the tangible aspect still in 2018, and I know a lot of people still do it online, but there's still something to be said for walking into a retail store and even if you're spending a lot of money, and that happens, but walking out with a box of shoes, man, that feeling's something special, right? Like you still feel like a kid when you walk out the store with a pair of shoes that you absolutely had to have. You've been wanting them forever. And when you walk home and you unbox them or you put them on for the first time, like that feeling still feels as good today as it felt, 20, 25 years ago as a kid, right?
Yeah, and I started trying to get stuff when I was 10. But actually, my background, so I had a $40 budget in middle school and elementary school, and then a $50 budget in high school. So I actually didn't have all the Air Jordans, all the pennies, all the best sneakers growing up. And so that was kind of also what spawned it. Was I was always trying to go back and rebuy the stuff that I couldn't get growing up. And even now, I've always kind of been nervous or wondered, like, when's that whole like aura and fun about it gonna fade away? And it hasn't. So it's still been fun to this day. I still every fall get excited for all the new launches, and even though I'm well older than all the guys that have their own signature shoe now, which is crazy to think, but it's still fun. And I think the thing for basketball is that it's the one sport of all the major sports where you can buy exactly the shoe that is worn on the court and wear it however you want. And there's such a culture and lifestyle aspect to the sport that football and baseball and soccer don't necessarily have. So for me, that's always been the appeal and been the best part.
For me, I grew up a Hornets fan, so I connected so much with those teams, and we could talk about that, especially with our 30th anniversary, because I want to get your perspective on the branding and all that stuff. But, man, for you grew up, Sacramento, right? So you were a Kings fan, Mitch Richmond and those guys, and then the Weber years after that, which were so great. But you grew up watching those Kings teams, which I'm sure helped you build those bonds with those players out there.
Yeah, so Mitch was my favorite player growing up, mostly because he was the only great player on those early Kings teams. And, I have a Mitch Richmond jersey signed and framed at my desk right here. It's the split purple-black with, the checker stripes on the side.
So good.
And purple's always been my favorite color. My first pair of Nikes was actually it was like an $85 shoe that Mitch wore that's been long forgotten, but that was always the connection for sure. And then as we got into Jason Williams and Chris Webber years, that's when it got really fun because both of those guys were wearing more flashy stuff. And Chris had a deal with Dada at the time and had the chrome shoes, and Jason Williams had the Hyper Flights, which were purple patent leather. And I've got a pair of Hyper Flights on my desk here as well. So that was always the fun for me was connecting to the Kings in any way. And then I think that whole 90s era, whether it was Orlando Magic and, the Sonics, those teams had so much, their jerseys were so unique, the colors were unique, and the players had a great, expressive personality. So it was always a great time. And whether it was the jerseys that were coming up or the starter jackets, I think that was also the era of when, people were wearing jerseys casually more too. So there was just kind of a whole renaissance at that time.
You go through high school, did you start to think okay, this isn't just a hobby I have. I want to find a way to make this my career? Because you go to Oregon. So was that something you, when I went to school, I thought I was going to be a music major. And then halfway through, I'm like, oh man, I like this broadcasting thing. Oh wait, I love sports. Why shouldn't I merge those two things? College often works that way too. So what was going through your head as you were going through high school, picking where you were going to go to school? And then once you got to Oregon, was this all stuff you thought about wanting to be around and turn into a career, or did you just kind of stumble into it?
No, I mean, I definitely had a game plan kind of the whole way. And I talk to kids all the time that are either in high school or college and trying to find their path. And, I was in the journalism program in high school, and it was a very strategic pick to go to Oregon because Eugene's about 2 hours south of Portland, where Nike and Adidas are based. And so I either wanted to work for one of the brands or my goal was actually to write for Slam Magazine. And so it was funny. We had this big white paper roll at our grad night in high school, and we were supposed to write what we were going to be doing in 10 years. And I had written, Nick DePaula will be writing for Slam Magazine. And so sure enough, ended up writing for a different magazine, and then Slam let me write an article it was 2 months before what would have been my 10th anniversary from high school, but so it ended up working out. But it was always about merging the writing side of it, and I just always thought there were so many. I think the things with signature shoes in particular, there's so many stories about the players that the different angle of into their life and into their tastes and interests, and so so many of these shoes have personal stories and connections to the players, and that was always a fun part of it too, was not just having a basketball angle as a basketball writer, but taking a whole different approach to it and telling a different side of these guys through their sneakers.
You were in college when you wrote for Slam for the first time? When was that?
Well, no. So Soul Collector started the fall of my freshman year in 2003, and I think within 2 years I was writing for the magazine. Anytime that the head guys were in Portland, I would just skip whatever I had going on and meet them in Portland for food or whatever, and just haggle them to try to write a story. And finally, they let me write a story. And it kind of became a recurring piece. It was funny. We had a section called Focus Shop, which was a profile of the sneaker boutique. Focus Collector, which was a profile of a collector, of course. And then I pitched Focus Artists to profile an aspiring shoe designer. And the first guy that my first article was on, his name was Justin Taylor. And a guy from N1 read the article, called him and hired him on the spot. And then a year later, he was working at Jordan Brand. And he's actually been designing Paul and Carmelo shoes all this time since. So it's been pretty nuts how both of us, through that article kind of paved our way
Nick,
in the last decade.
That's crazy, man. That's crazy.
he's actually done a lot of the shoes recently that a bunch of the Hornets have been wearing, and of course with all the Jordan guys that are on that team. So it's been pretty cool.
Do you guys feel like you're kind of linked together professionally? Like, have you guys stayed in touch and maintained? I'm sure you have, right? Like, you guys have had to have had a great relationship since that point.
Yeah, he actually moved out to Portland about a year and a half before I was done with school, and then once I was up here, we played ball, 4 or 5 days a week originally, and now he's got a family and all that, but we still hang out to this day, and he still owes me dinner from 10 years ago. I always tease him, but we've definitely been great friends ever since.
So when you climb up the ladder at Soul Collector, because you get all the way up to editor-in-chief, like, how quickly did that happen? You're young, so for you to be in that role, like, what age were you when you climbed all the way to that role?
It was super wild. So, because I was an out-of-state tuition student, my mom made me do a full summer school load every year because that was kind of like, I think it was like a third or a fourth of the price. And so I actually graduated a little early, December of 2006. And about 2 months later, one of the head writers, Ernest Kim, left for a job at Nike. And then Alex Wang, the other head writer, left for a job at Nike. So by the following summer, I was 22 and all of a sudden thrown into the fire as the editor-in-chief. And then later that fall, I was doing we had a cover shoot with Carmelo for the Melo 4 at that point. And then a year later, we were at Penny Hardaway's house for that cover shoot. So within a year, all of a sudden, I was doing all the cover stories. I was probably writing about 60 or 70% of the magazine. And it was pretty nuts right away to just be right into it. And, luckily it all worked out and we had a great run for about 7 years there.
So Bobby was telling us a couple weeks ago, Bobby Marks was saying, your former colleague, Bobby was saying, now your current colleague again, but Bobby was saying he remembered when Woj came to him, I think it was at Summer League, when he was building up this idea of, okay, this is going to be the vertical and we're going to have breaking news. It's going to be me and Shams, and then it's going to be a shoe guy. You're the shoe guy. It's going to, we need you to be the cap guy, the front office guy. And he was like, yeah, I'm in. This is great, right? Like, I would have never thought about this, but this is a genius idea. So when did Woj come to you, and what did you remember initially of this idea of like this vertical site, which was just committed to hoops and especially the NBA and covering it in a way nobody had ever had before? What did you think about that?
Yes, it was right after the draft in 2016, I believe it was. And, at that point I was breaking a lot of the rookie shoe deals and some of the stuff into the fall. And one of my good friends, Nate Jones, who is a marketing agent for the Goodwin Sports Agency, he had kept retweeting my tweets with any breaking news stuff, and he would do the hashtag SneakerWoj. And I'm pretty sure that's how Woj actually first started seeing some of my stuff, And so it was definitely early in that summer. And then he was actually coming out to Portland September of that year to meet with some folks in the Blazers just to check in before the season. And he was, he just kind of reached out and said, hey, let's grab lunch. I've got this idea for you. I want to run by you. And so I was, of course, let's do it. So, I think Woj, the great thing about him is, obviously, he's best in class in terms of breaking news and can do on camera, can do great written stories as well. But the way that he broke out the framework of the vertical early on was just such a sharp strategy, because his biggest thing was, let's tap into Twitter and let's really have a network of people that have breaking news and great insights into the game. And so that was kind of the top line view. And so whether it was Bobby in terms of, if there was a random trade that took place, Bobby would be the very first one that had all the cap dynamics of how it impacts everything, and it was super unique and interesting. Shams was great at that time, and obviously has since taken off even further on his own in terms of breaking all the smaller deals and other stuff as well. That was throughout the sport. And then Chris Mannix was awesome in terms of kind of being the host of different shows that brought it all together. And then Michael Lee was on the other side of things with the human interest and kind of great profile. So it was fun for me because I always teased Woj. I was like, I'm just the oddity guy that writes about sneakers, and I'm personally a huge fan of reading everything that the site is doing at the same time. So it made it super fun to be attached with. And as we kind of all, most of us at least, merged over to ESPN last summer, it's been just as great too.
Yeah, and I feel like that site was ahead of its time because you look at what The Athletic has been now, and it's kind of the similar model, right? Like, let's get all these talented people, put them under one roof, and just cover things from a variety of angles that you really can't find anywhere else. But the vertical was really the first of its kind. The MMQB was kind of around the same time, I think, with Peter King with his site, but for football. But that that was really unprecedented at the time. I think what Woj brought together with you guys.
Yeah, and I think it was during a time where, you know, other sites were doing kind of clickbait stuff, or sometimes more of the like the gossip and pop culture of the league. And I think Woj had always just like a very keen focus just to make sure it was. He was just always like really big on just give people information and insight throughout the whole piece. You know, don't really waste any space with kind of frivolous stuff. And you know, the other group of guys that really rounded things out too was Jonathan Gavoni and Mike Schmitz on the draft
side.
So,
yeah.
You know, so it was like the way that he kind of figured out all the pillars of what could be interesting to round it all together. I always thought that was, you know, just a sharp strategy, and obviously it worked out pretty well.
The thing that's really interesting to me, Nick, and I think you could say this about virtually anything in our world anymore, but I think it's especially true about the shoe culture around the NBA and basketball. It is directly, I feel like, and maybe you disagree, but I feel like it is directly tied to the rise and the proliferation of the internet, and specifically even so social media, and even beyond that, I'd almost say Instagram has taken it to another level altogether. You feel like that's fair? Because I mean, you and I are of a similar age. Shoe culture was a thing, but as you said, I'm like you. Our family didn't have the money to go after shoes like this or pay attention to shoes like this, and the info was delayed in getting to you because maybe you read it in a Sports Illustrated or Slam magazine or whatever it is. Now it's so instantaneous. I feel like the internet has completely changed the game on the shoe culture.
No, absolutely. I mean, over time, I think there was probably three different spikes you could look at. Obviously, in the mid-'80s when Michael Jordan came on the scene and kind of changed the whole dynamic of what it meant to have your own shoe. But then as you got into the late 90s, that was pretty much when the internet took off, and you had so much kind of balance, I would say. You had, you know, Allen Iverson at Reebok, Kobe and T-Mac with Adidas, Grant Hill with Fila. Like, there was guys across the board at different brands that were great players. And then I think as you got into the late 2000s and early 2010s, you had LeBron and Kobe just dominating at Nike. And that's when really Instagram took off. And, you know, in the old days, it was always 4 or 5 colors for a shoe, obviously tied to the team colors and things like that. But by the late 2000s, Nike was doing about 25 or 30 colorways in some of those Kobe and LeBrons. And it was just getting crazy in terms of how many releases there were every week. And then also just the retro Jordans that were really ramping up. And it just kind of took everything into this new decade where it's been definitely, I mean, and having covered everything through that whole era, it's definitely a whole different trajectory and kind of more mainstream interest than it ever was.
Well, and here's the crazy part, right? So this is where it goes full circle to your point, because I'm like you, again, where I was one of 5 kids. We were a middle-class family. My parents worked really hard. We just didn't have that kind of disposable income. Even if I said, man, I love that pair of shoes, I got to go have them. Sorry, we can't afford that, right? Like, we'll get you, maybe you'll get 1 pair of Nikes for the year, and you better take care of them, and then we'll do it again when you go back to school next year. So as we've gotten older, right, like we've got jobs, we've got families, we've had a little bit more disposable income. We get to now see the stuff that was new when we were young become retro again. Now now it's crossed age lines and demographic lines, I feel like. So not only do kids who are growing up want this stuff and the younger generation want it, you get the folks who have now matured and have aged up who want to go back and kind of relive their childhood. So now it's crazy because this isn't something you would just say, oh, that's a teenager thing. I think it's true of any age where people are sneakerheads now.
Yeah, and I mean, my friends still tease me because I still dress like a high schooler at times.
Yeah.
You know, and I think whether it was like in particular, like Dennis Rodman's Shake and Destruct shoe came out as a retro last year, and it had like the lacing on the side.
Oh.
And that was the first time they brought it out since it released in '96. And I bought every color. I was so excited. I wore them all the time. And it's just fun because like those are the kinds of things where you have an attachment to your childhood, and it's something that still lives on 20 years later. And then there's new kids that can gravitate to it and you know, adopt it in their own way too. And so, you know, I think sneakers have always been a fun thing because it's something that, especially growing up playing ball, like it brought people together from all walks of life. Like I've been able to travel to China and barely speak the same language, but still connect with people that, you know, have a mutual love for sneakers as well. So it's pretty cool just how it can bring people together from all different walks of life and all over the country and even the world.
So who do you think? I mean, Jordan's Jordan. We're going to talk about MJ later, but other than Mike, and that maybe it's a bit. I think it is a big gulf. But in the shoe culture, in the shoe world, who's been super influential in your mind in terms of for whatever reason that is, whether it's design or branding or all marketing, all that stuff. Who's the next guy in your opinion? You look at him and say, man, that guy's he's pushed the game out in a different direction like MJ has.
The two guys in the 90s that definitely stick out would be Penny Hardaway and then Allen Iverson.
Yeah.
And I think, Penny obviously had a short-lived kind of height of his career, but at his height, I mean, I think he was first-team All-NBA his third season, made the finals that year. I mean, he was insane and potentially one of the greatest players ever had he had a full career. But then you look at his Penny 1 and Penny 2 and then the foam posit, and those are kind of the most iconic. I always call it the court block, like how the shoe stands out on the floor. And those were some sneakers that no matter what, you could see them a mile away, and they just had an iconic look and design. And then Allen Iverson, I think the Reebok deal he signed was 10 years and $60 million at the time. John Thompson was on the board of directors at Nike, and he was like, "Listen, he's like, don't even think twice about this. You better take your ass to Reebok." So
yeah.
It was funny how. Allen was a Nike guy his whole life and loved Jordan, of course, and played at Georgetown and just took the Nike deal took the Reebok deal and said it was a no-brainer, and then immediately out the gate just totally took Reebok to a different level. So those guys for sure stand out. And I think if you look at the late 2000s, once Kobe really got in the flow with Nike and into like the Kobe 4 and Kobe 5, he took things to a different level in terms of performance. I've done a ton of interviews with him, and I've done a lot of interviews with a lot of the guys that have their own shoes, but the language that Kobe speaks and the kind of meticulous approach that he has to how the shoe is designed is unlike any other player. And it makes a lot of sense because that's how he approached his work ethic and the approach to the game as well. But I think he took the industry to a different place in terms of how shoes are made and the athlete involvement that people are looking for.
Well, that's interesting, too, because I was going to bring up Kobe, Nick. Like, I think you're right on that because I think he, as you said, his mindset of just who he is as a player, he views the shoe as a tool, which I think is maybe
exactly.
Right, so I think there's like a line of demarcation that's going on now. There's like a fork in the road where some people are going down this path, some people are going down that path, and it's kind of hard, I think, maybe at times to marry the two. But the thing that I've and I just bought a pair of Kobe ADs the other day.
There you go.
Yeah, his Sunday whites, which are, for me, anything in like white, black, purple, teal, I'm buying. So I bought the Sunday white Kobe AD, which is more of a mid. Like he's more of a low guy. It's more of a mid, but I like it. But that shoe right there, that's the other piece to me where like he's turned it into a lifestyle piece as well, where he made a shoe that maybe not only was really functional on the court, but that somebody would look at and say, you know what, I can't pull off a high top or I can't pull off a traditional mid top, but I'll tell you what, I'll wear a low top basketball sneaker. And now I feel like we've seen more people go into that sort of game as well with their signature shoes, and that's a Kobe thing. I feel like he made the low top cool again.
I mean, absolutely, without question. And I think for him, a lot of it came from soccer inspiration, and he was looking at different cleats and how close they were fitting and still had the support. And so he was really driving Nike hard on that. I mean, Steve Nash and Gilbert Arenas wore lows a little before, and they were kind of the outliers. Now you have, all kinds of guys at all positions. That's the crazy thing. It's not just guards,
Yeah.
Mo Bamba that just got drafted, he exclusively plays in lows, and he's what you would consider a traditional big man, So there's all kinds of guys across the league, and even signature shoes now. We have, James Harden, Damian Lillard, Chris Paul, and even Steph Curry's shoe is merged into a low top. So it's been something we've seen across the board for sure. And I think it definitely lends itself to just being more casual and easy to kick around if you're not going to be playing in it.
Some of the stuff I hear you say about Kobe, I think I'm sensing from afar about Kyrie, but maybe in a different way. His branding, Nick, is crazy. And like the cereal pack that just dropped last weekend, every time, like some guys are releasing cool colorways, it always seems like there's a reason why Kyrie's dropping a new colorway or dropping a new design. And like he's nailed the marketing and branding aspect, I think maybe almost better than anybody out there in the shoe world right now.
Yeah, and I think you see it with whether it's Uncle Drew or some of the stuff with the Wheaties collaboration they did. I mean, a lot of that comes directly from him, and he's really, really creative and also very hands-on. There's the designer that he works with, his name is Ben, and then the color designer is a different guy named Ben, and both of those guys are just great at what they do and have great ideas. So, we've seen him, whether it was, I think it was, last fall where they were playing the 76ers in the London game, and his shoe had all kinds of inspiration from the arena and the local orchestra and had these music notes on the side, and it was super unique and something that not everybody would come up with. And it's those kinds of ideas that Kyrie's always pushing on. And he's a guy that loves to wear bright colors, stuff that clashes. He always says, like, if I'm wearing a white jersey, I want to wear a color shoe, and sometimes vice versa. So he has a lot of fun with it. He's only 4 shoes in, but he's been off to a great start for sure.
Do you feel like you could boil down one guy? I know this is very subjective, but like if you said today, in today's game, signature shoe-wise, in terms of like maybe it's meshing performance, branding, design, all that stuff tied together into one big piece, do you feel like you could boil it down and say, you know what, I think this guy's got the best signature shoe in the game right now? Is that possible?
That's a tough one. It potentially would be Kyrie.
Yeah. Just
because of there's the great performance aspects to it as well. And then if you look, I don't know if you've ever caught this, but, his shoes kind of have that zigzag teeth on the forefoot.
Yep.
Which is mostly for grip, but it's actually also inspired by the Sydney Opera House and his kind of Australia background from his childhood. So it's a super cool kind of like jagged line connecting point to it, and it also serves a functional element. So those are the kinds of like super small nuances that they've kind of layered over all throughout Kyrie's shoes that have been really, really sharp. And then I think, I've seen some of the stuff Steph Curry's working on, and he's getting to a really good spot. I know obviously the Chef Curry back in the day was a funny one, but I think they're getting to a good spot. And then James Harden is starting to layer a lot more personal touches onto his stuff too, but I think they still have a little ways to go. So for me, Kyrie definitely stands out, and I think Kobe still too.
Again, I'm kind of a layman in this area. I've mostly looked at LeBron's shoe and thought, you know what? It's kind of forgettable. I felt like it's always just kind of been out there. And if you were a LeBron fan, maybe you wanted his shoe, but maybe it didn't drive the rest, like the casual market as much. But I thought he nailed it with the 15. Like that shoe spoke to me. I loved the design. I loved everything they did with LeBron watch throughout the year, all the different colorways, like everything was intentional. And the hearkening back to the past of his past shoes too. Like I thought LeBron nailed it in the 15, but it's interesting you say that too, Nick, because it's like I think people just think, oh, that guy's got a good shoe or that guy's got a trash shoe. But it's like any art form, like you put out a good album, maybe the next album isn't so good, or you get into a rhythm of, okay, we're starting to find out what our identity is, and I guess signature shoes are no different than that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I remember hearing from some of the folks at Nike how it was really when Kobe around the Kobe 4 and 5 was being so involved on the technology and the different nuances, and LeBron's thing always was more so like, how does it look?
Yeah.
And he would always say, I'm not a designer or developer, and I trust you guys to handle all the technology. And so I think as we got into like LeBron 12, 13, and 14, they were getting a little overbuilt and a little just not really mass friendly obviously nobody is LeBron's size, and he's such an outlier and just freak of nature. And so some of those shoes were overbuilt. And then I think for the 15, they took it back to just a more wearable look. But the LeBron watch in particular was amazing. I ended up counting the whole season, and he wore 51 different versions of the 15. So, I think each one of those, they kind of had, they had a great kind of trio of stories too, whether it was classic Nike stories like Ken Griffey Jr. and the shoebox and Deion Sanders, or if it was classic LeBron stories like the Zoom Generation and some other ones too from his background, and then even new stories too. So they had a great approach with it. They're going to redo the and replay the LeBron watch concept for the 16 and have a lot of fun with it too. And I think that's been an approach that worked great. And I would definitely say it was a resurgent year for them with the 15.
Yeah, I thought, again, I'm biased. I like any colorway that's white, black, teal, purple, or a mix of all those things. And so the Griffies, the Swingmans were, man, that was a good looking shoe. That was a great looking shoe.
Yeah, and each one had so much thought and detail. So they had like the jersey number and the icons and all the little logos. They had it all dialed down really well. So you could tell they spent a lot of time with it and did a great job.
You had a great great story about Puma on ESPN.com, and they're back in the game for the first time in almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And I found the quotes, and I know you did too, like the quotes from their executives who are saying, look, we think what we're talking about right now, we think the signature model is a little broken right now in the sport, and we're not going to delve into that right away. We're not worried about that part of it. That's fascinating to me. So they're not just jumping in head first saying, yeah, we'll just do what everybody else is doing and try and carve out a lane. They're really approaching this in a different way. What'd you think of like the whole rebrand and relaunch with Puma and also that aspect right there, Nick?
So when he said it, when we were doing the interview, it definitely caught me off guard and stuck out. You know, I think most everybody, I mean, outside of maybe the Hyperdunk and the Adidas Crazy Light, signature shoes have been by far the drivers of the industry over the last probably 10 years. And I remember looking up, this was tons of fun. I looked up every single shoe that was worn by every player in the league last season. And almost 68% of the league was wearing a signature shoe, even though there's only 12 guys that have a signature shoe. And so it was something where, you know, whether it's guys wearing Kobe's, guys wearing KD's, guys wearing Kyrie's, you're seeing guys across the league at all positions wear a signature shoe of another player at times too.
Why do you think that is, by the way? Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of it has to do with Nike putting the most, you know, effort and technology into a lot of that stuff. You know, if it's not the Hyperdunk, which I didn't personally love playing in the Hyperdunk the last 2 years, but if it's not the Hyperdunk or the Crazy Light or the Crazy Explosive, the signature shoe is going to have the most cushioning and technology. So I think a lot of guys just naturally gravitated to it that way. And then there's also this element where I talked to so many players that didn't care if they were wearing another guy's shoe. You know, like there was, I think in the 90s, there was more of a pride about it.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys that would say, you know, I'm not going to wear another man's shoe or wear a shoe with somebody else's name on it. And we didn't really, I think in the last 5 to 10 years, that's kind of all gone away. And maybe it's because of Kobe and how much that shoe became just seen across the league. But I think that whole dynamic to it is out the door. And I don't know if it's just because of all these guys being friends now in a different way than what it was in the 90s. But it's an interesting dynamic. And for Puma's sake, too, I think the biggest thing for them is that they didn't feel like they maybe had a signature guy yet, too. You know, I think there's only eight guys that have gotten a signature shoe for game one of their rookie year just throughout the league history. And so unless you have one of those transcendent guys, which I don't think there was in this draft, you know, I think that's part of it, too. Even a guy like Kyrie and Steph and James, they all didn't get their own signature shoe until, you know, I think year 4, 5, or 6 for each of them. So, you know, Puma's maybe slow playing it and trying to just build more equity around the Clyde court and their main team shoe. But I think the other thing for them is that they don't want to just run the same playbook that everybody else is doing, and you're seeing them be really kind of creative and loose with how they approach, whether it's marketing or all kinds of different elements of their brand. So I think it's tons of fun because it adds a kind of a wild card to the whole mix. They're also offering crazy money to a lot of these players, and so it kind of raises the stakes for the stuff that I cover, which is fun. And they're letting guys really be expressive. Like you saw Terry Rozier's quote, which we can't actually repeat for this podcast, and that's not something most brands allow guys to say, you know. So I thought that was fun. I thought that was really fun, and you know, it lets guys kind of be themselves and not just be a pitchman.
Well, and then you reported too, like New Balance is trying to go after Gordon Hayward. You reported that, right? Like there's some things that could happen there, and I think they've got they're the sponsor, their new training facility, so like New Balance could get into the hoops world. Like that seems interesting to me too. And I think that's probably a testament to the marketplace, right, Nick? Like no business is just going to jump in if they don't think there's money to be made. So like clearly there are still other shoe companies who either used to be in it and haven't been in a while or want to get in for the first time thinking, hey, if we have the right business plan here, like we can own even whatever that is, right? Like 2-3% of the market. Who cares? There's money to be made there.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to just basketball having all the touch points of music and culture and also just how active the players are on social media compared to other sports. You know, I think when you look at the NBA and all their personalities, you know, you have a guy like Nick Young, who is a hugely influential shoe endorser and sometimes plays 6 minutes a game, you know. So the dynamics of what it means to be an impactful endorser are totally different than the last time Puma was in the game. And so I think that makes it interesting, too. You know, a guy like Joel Embiid, whose shoe deal is up, if this was the mid-'90s or early 2000s, brands wouldn't have probably any interest at all, and he would just get a pretty straightforward basic shoe deal. But now, because of how he's able to just dominate on social media with pretty much everything he puts out, it makes him really intriguing for a brand like Puma or even New Balance. So I think the whole dynamic has shifted, and it's made it pretty exciting. And I think we're seeing, even And One coming back into the game, and New Balance around the corner, and then Puma too. So it's kind of an exciting time where it's getting back to what that 90s feel was, where you had brands across the board and more balance too.
Where's Fila at? Who's bringing Fila back? Can somebody do that?
I was just going to bring them up because they're actually re-signing Grant Hill, yes, with him going into the Hall of Fame this fall to do some official relaunches of some of his early shoes as well. So it's fun because I think if you look at Puma, Reebok, and Fila in certain pockets of the world have started to also kind of have some momentum in certain fashion circles too. There's that whole kind of 90s, obviously you've seen it with like the dad shoe trend, but there's that kind of like normcore kind of vibe that's started to take over in certain fashion angles too. And so for those brands, they've been having a lot of momentum, and that's kind of given them some juice to get back into the game in the NBA.
Yeah, I almost what do you say about the Air Skylon? Is that a dad shoe? How do you feel about that? Is that considered a dad shoe?
I would say that's definitely a dad shoe. It's a little sleeker, but it's still a dad shoe for sure. But it's not as overly built and clunky. Like some of the dad shoes that we're seeing are just outlandish for no reason, and that's the whole point. Whether it's like the Balenciaga shoe or obviously the Monarchs, which is hilarious. But I think the Skylon is a good entry level dad shoe for sure.
Yeah, because I almost copped the Blue Lagoon Skylon 2s the other day, so I guess I'm buying dad shoes.
I figured that was where you headed with that.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I've revealed my hand. You know how I feel about this stuff now. You went to China with Clay, and so this is the other piece of the whole shoe world that I think for us here domestically, it's out of sight, out of mind. And so there might be a lot of fans, right? Like, I'm not buying Clay's, I'm not buying his Antas, or I'm not buying the Way of Wade's. I'm not going to buy Dwight Howard's Peak shoes. But that market over in China, so that's the trade-off, right? Like maybe you're a guy who says, all right, I'm not going to be Kyrie, I'm not going to be LeBron, I'm not going to be Steph domestically, but yeah, there's a ton of money to be made overseas, and the attention and adoration they get when they go over there. You were with Clay on that tour with Anta, so that's a whole nother world altogether that I think we don't even think about here in the States because we literally don't see what's going on the other side of the globe.
So when I went, so I've been 2 times now. Last summer was the first time. And I'd never been to China. I obviously knew that it was a massive, population and fan base, but until you're actually there, it's totally beyond what you're imagining. Here in the U.S., I think Foot Locker has a couple hundred stores, and that's probably the most known retailer. And then some of the brands have their own stores. But in China, all the brands, if you're going to buy an Anta shoe, it's going to be at an Anta store. Every store is the brand's store. And Anta has, I think it's 9,600 stores throughout China.
Man.
So if you look at, Clay's shoe in particular, he sold a little over 1,000 pairs of shoes in the U.S. last year, and he sold almost, I think it was 700,000 in China.
Woo!
So, you start to look at a 5% royalty on every shoe. And then on top of that, you're going to be making, I think if you look in general, a lot of the Chinese shoe deals are about 2 to 3 times what you might get from a Nike or Adidas by comparison, if you're that status of a player. So if you start to add up all the dollars, if you're looking at a guy like Clay in particular, and that could start to impact him taking less to want to stay with the Warriors next summer. There's so many different things that it could impact. And then you go over there to China, and every single city was just ridiculously packed and excited to see him. Because he's with the Chinese brand and because he's got his antics and great personality when he goes over and tours there, he's way higher on the popularity chart than what he is in the U.S. And the fans really gravitate to him and a guy like Derrick Rose even still, just because of the way they connect. So it's kind of a whole different approach. I think here in the U.S., kids are more excited about, the off-court, the lifestyle, and the younger players that resonate a little more. And in China, it's a little different. They really appreciate winners, and they really kind of always are locked in and focused on the height of somebody's career and the best moments. And so it's a different approach, and the fans there are incredible. And for Clay in particular, and D Wade with his Li Ning deal, those are the 2 that I think kind of caught everybody's attention and have really moved the needle in terms of opening everybody's eyes up to that being a super intriguing option.
got a Michael Jordan story for you. Okay, you ready for this?
I'm ready.
All right, so we were in Las Vegas for Summer League a couple of months ago. I just started, by the way, like literally whatever that was, 3 weeks before, whatever. I just started on the job, and we were taping something for Hornets.com, and we were staying at our resort, and we were in a on the ground floor. We're actually outside under an awning. We're VIP entrance for the Skylofts area, all that stuff. So my back is to the door, facing out towards the Strip, and we're shooting, and I see a couple guys walk from, my periphery. They clearly walk from behind me out in front of me, and I thought, oh, you look familiar. And sure enough, it was Michael Jordan, right? And I've heard people say this, Nick, multiple people say, yeah, the first thing Michael will do when he sees you is he looks at your feet. And so sure enough, he did, right? He looked me up and down, and he looked me up and down, and he walked a few steps, and he looked back, and he said, nice shoes. And I just so happened to be wearing my AJ 3s that day. I was wearing my Air Jordan 3s, and I nearly fainted. And sure enough, he got in his truck, and they left. And that was it. That was all he had to say, because he's Michael Jordan. And I'll have that moment with me for the rest of my life. But I was thinking to myself, once I finally settled down the rest of the day, I thought, what must it be like to not only be the greatest basketball player that's ever played the game and have the most iconic shoe, but then know that people around the world are constantly wearing your shoe and it's got your logo on it. And that whole thing is such I can't wrap my head around that. That blew my mind. And that's got to be the greatest feeling on earth for him. Even to this day, there's no way that gets old, where he could walk to a random place and look at somebody's feet and be like, yup, you're wearing my shoe right now.
To me, the other element that has to be crazy is not only owning your own basketball team, but having your shoe logo on the jersey
right?
now.
Oh,
I mean, that had to be the coolest thing ever. And I know when they were launching the Nike jerseys, early on it was discussed, do we do the Wizards and the Bulls and the Hornets? Do we do multiple teams, or do we just do the Hornets? What do we do? And I mean, just having the one team that stands out as the Jumpman logo has to be the coolest thing. And then for me too, having it at the All-Star Weekend last year, 30th anniversary of the threes that you were wearing and the free throw line dunk, having the Jumpman on the All-Star game jerseys too, that's just incredible for him from a branding standpoint, and just kind of really drives everything home in terms of just his icon status for sure.
Well, and it's hard to say definitively this will never happen again, but this will never happen again, right? Nobody is going to culturally reach the heights that he reached, what he did on the court, off the court. It was just a perfect storm, right, of why it was so successful and such a cool thing at the time, and now all these 30 years later, it's still that way. We won't do this with any other player, right? 30 or 40 years from now, be like, man, I got to look. I got to go get that guy's shoes, or all these re-releases that are coming out. This is going to be once in a lifetime with Michael, right? I can't see this happen with any other player down the road.
No question, because I think the other thing too is that, all the shoes that were coming out were the first of their kind in terms of design and stories and technology, and there was such a newness to everything. And it was, whether MJ was pitching whatever he was pitching or winning the way he was, I think everybody afterwards is always going to be following that model. And it's tough because you see brands really try to replicate it too, and sometimes it works better than others. But, I think when LeBron came in, that was the model they were trying to replicate, and it's been tough. I think to have, if you look across let's say the first 23 Air Jordans, you're talking about maybe 10 or 12 of the most iconic sneakers ever, all in that batch. And so, you look at LeBron, he doesn't really have a Jordan 1, a Jordan 3, or a Jordan 11, anything close to that level. And so to have this go on now, 20 years since MJ retired from the Bulls, it's impossible to see, I think, that happening ever again.
And now to see the new tech get folded into the old designs too, like the Flyknit. My sneakers app went off at 10 o'clock this morning, and man, did I rush to try to go grab those AJ 3s in the Flyknit. That's the other crazy part now, is you get these re-releases. Not only are the new colorways so awesome, but you get some new design tech on them where you're like, not only does this make this an awesome looking shoe, it's super functional too. And it's just, you got to have it. Still to this day, I got to go get that shoe. Or when you re-release just the textbook trademark cement colorway in the 3, you got to have it, because it's just so classic. It stands the test of time.
And you could do the Jumpman on the heel, then 3 years later the Nike Air on the heel.
I know.
And a whole different story 3 years later. So they've done a great job kind of having a never-ending cycle of how they could flow these out. And then, between the 11 every Christmas, I mean, there's just certain models that you have to have and that are going to be icons forever.
So let's talk about the Hornets for a second, because it's our 30th anniversary. And, a lot of what I feel like you're talking about, Nick, with the shoe culture and just how big and the lifestyle piece has become around the game and the league. I mean, the Hornets are a major part of that. Alexander Julian saying, hey, let's put pinstripes on some pleated basketball shorts and we'll be teal and purple. Like, it literally changed the game to where half the league went towards like cartoonish over-the-top designs like that at some point in the 90s, and it really all started with Charlotte.
Yeah, and I think you could even look to the court design, which was so unique and exciting, and it's super cool to see that you guys are bringing that back as well. I remember when the mocks leaked, I think it was last week, when everything was posted, it was awesome to see that kind of expressive court was coming back. But, when you look in the early 90s when the team was just coming up, whether it was Larry Johnson or Alonzo or even Del Curry and Muggsy, there were some great personalities that color scheme, I think everybody around the country got excited about, whether it was starter jackets, just the gear. The Hornet icon was super cool and unique. It was just one of those iconic teams that I think a lot of people had probably, especially growing up in Sacramento, like maybe you had seen the Hornets a few times when they played the Kings, or maybe you had played with the Hornets on NBA Jam, but it's not like today where you were really having a lot of access to actually watching the team play. You just loved the gear and wanted to represent it still. And so, I definitely think the Magic and the Hornets in particular really drove that whole 90s look. And you had everybody around the league that started to replicate it. And
I know I'm a little different on this, but so Nike and Jordan Brand worked together for the brand identity when the name came back, which never happens, by the way. Like, I still don't think people have wrapped their head around the fact that we got the name back. Like, that never happens. That unless that's agreed to on the front end, that never happens. So, like, that is such a huge piece that I will always be grateful for, to have a piece of my childhood back. And I love the new brand identity, too, because it is so different. Like, I know people say, I want the throwbacks all the time, and that's great. But the new brand identity that Jordan and Nike put together, it really does harken back with all the different logos. And then the colors are they're just tweaked a little bit. So it's this modern take on what was a classic logo and so different at the time 30 years later. So I like our new brand identity, too, because I think it stands up, too, in a different way.
No, it's great. I know there's certain league guidelines where they want to have it be just enough different from the originals so that you're not, cannibalizing the hardwood classic nights and things like that. But, I think if you look at the Hornets and it's funny to think it's been 30 years, but how perfect is it too that the All-Star game's coming to town?
No doubt.
There's so many things that Jordan Brand's going to be able to activate and do in Charlotte around that. And whether it's, different Grade 5 releases that are down the pipeline here or other things that harken to that color scheme, it's going to be a great, exciting time for sure.
Last thing here, okay, so I know people, like you said, people have asked you, okay, what's your favorite shoe of all time, those sort of questions. I'm kind of putting you on the spot on this one, but you get three choices here, okay, and here's how I'm going to explain this crazy hypothetical. In this crazy hypothetical, Nick DePaula, you have three shoes. One you're going to need to wear just whenever, like around town. You're out, running some errands, whatever. You're hanging around the house. Another pair that you'd work out in, you want to hoop in, and then another pair that, if you need to go out for a nice date night or whatever, you got to wear a nice pair of shoes. So could be current, could be retro, whatever. But those three pairs, they'll never, you don't have to worry about wear and tear. Just assume they'll always stay perfectly clean. But you got to pick those three pairs for three different instances in your life for the rest of your life. Those are the only three you're ever going to wear again. What are you rolling with?
Man, that's tough. Okay. I'm going to pick the black and white Zoom Generation for my basketball shoe.
Okay.
When I was in college when those first came out, I think I had 6 pairs that I went through. I was just rebuying them on eBay every time I ran out, or every time I wore through a pair. And the retro, they did a great job on those. I still play in a pair now. So those are probably my pick. I love that shoe. Let's see. To kick around, I'm going to pick some funky ones, actually. I actually have a pair of the Nike All Courts. They're like a cheetah prints. I'm gonna pick something festive. I wear a lot of like loud prints and like different. I have a bunch of like cheetah and like leopard print stuff.
Okay.
I'm gonna go with that. That's my Dennis Rodman fan in me. And then it's a not a boring shoe, but it's an easy shoe. But it's spelled like or said, it says Lanvin, but it's spelled Lanvin. And they just have a black and white patent leather toe shoe that is one of the best shoes of all time, and that's what I would probably always wear if I'm going out for a nice dinner or something more. I don't actually get dressed up. I'll wear them with sweatpants sometimes too, but that's probably the kind of clean and casual shoe I wear.
God forbid you ever had to boil it down to 3 shoes for the rest of your life, right? Like, thank God you actually don't have to do that.
I have a batch of like 10 shoes that are just like always my grab and go shoes that I rotate through, and even that is probably more than most. So it's definitely it's a hard question.
Well, Nick, I'm such a big fan, man, and you've made this is the greatest compliment I think I could pay anybody. But reading your work and watching you on the jump and watching you on Outside the Lines and ESPN and all the great stuff you're doing, you make me more passionate about what you're passionate about. So keep doing your thing, man. It's cool to see you covering the league in a way that it needs to be covered because it's a big part of the league that I think has gone underserved for a long time. So keep doing great things at ESPN and nice kicks, and thanks for hanging out with us for a little while.
No, I really appreciate that. That's awesome to hear. Thanks a lot, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So that was time well spent with Nick DePaula from ESPN. Now Nice Kicks as well started at Soul Collector, and he covers the league really like nobody else does, covering the shoe angle and the lifestyle piece, breaking shoe deals, and we appreciate him dropping by. And maybe we'll keep jumping into that part of the game as we keep going on throughout the year right here on Courtside Seats. You can find us virtually anywhere you find podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio. You could find us in Apple Podcasts as well. Just search for my name, Kroeger, Kroeger. You could search Charlotte Hornets as well, Courtside Seats. Just make sure you subscribe. Leave a review if you don't mind. Rate us as well, and we appreciate that. You could also find us on our Charlotte Hornets YouTube channel. Same thing, just search Charlotte Hornets. You could search Courtside Seats on YouTube. You'll see us there, and then once you find us, make sure you subscribe. We're going to be back next Monday. You can find us, as always, right here on Courtside Seats.